He was a father of 27 children, yes, 27, scattered across 5 counties and born to different women. To some, Drevonte Malik Garrison was a smooth-talking ladies' man with a magnetic charm. To others, he was a parasite in designer clothes, spinning lies as fast as he made babies. But behind the social media reels of girl dads and flashy family photo shoots was a man juggling secrets like live grenades. And eventually, they all blew up. By the time police arrived, the backyard looked like a war zone, blood on the patio, shattered glass in the grass, and 27 children crying for the man who built his kingdom out of lies and lust, and lost it all in one violent, unforgettable afternoon. What happens when the women you've deceived compare notes? When years of humiliation, betrayal, and manipulation boil over into something primal, something feral? This is the story of Drevonte Garrison, a man whose appetite for control pushed 17 women past the breaking point, and ended in a kind of justice no courtroom could ever deliver. If this story shook you, hit that like button and subscribe for more true tales that pull back the curtain on obsession, betrayal, and the horrifying cost of deception. Because sometimes, the scariest monsters, are the ones we fall in love with. Drevonte Halloway wasn't just known in South Memphis, he was legendary. He cruised down Elvis Presley Boulevard in candy-painted Chevys, windows down, bass thumping, shades on at midnight. Everywhere he went, people knew his name. Kids waved at him. Barbers paused their clippers when he walked in. Corner boys made room, and pastors prayed harder when they saw him sitting in the back pew. Dre had that kind of presence. The kind that could light up a room or set it on fire. He wore his confidence like cologne, loud, thick, and impossible to ignore. With every slick grin and carefully rehearsed compliment, Dre knew exactly what he was doing. He moved like a man who'd already written his own myth, and South Memphis. That was his stage. But behind the flash and charisma was a man with no roots. He never held down a job for more than a few weeks, unless you counted fast hustles and fast talking. He never paid rent twice at the same address. And he never, ever told the truth. Still, women flocked to him like he was salvation in a silk do-rag. They weren't naive. They were hopeful. Because Dre didn't just lie, he performed the lie. He played the role of devoted father, romantic partner, even community leader when it suited him. To Roneisha, he was the first man who made her feel seen. To Tychelle, he was the father figure she wanted her sons to admire. To Saphyra, he was the sexy mistake she hoped would turn into a miracle. To Ahliyah, he was a soulmate with demons she thought she could heal. And to Chardini, he was the man who promised her forever, and didn't even stay for the birth. 16 women. 27 kids. One man. He had them all believing they were the only one. Sunday morning kisses. Wednesday night promises. Friday night disappearances. Over and over, Dre performed the same script, just with different actresses. And they believed him. Because love, when it's desperate enough, will believe a lie dressed in cologne and coated in charm. To the outside world, he looked like a man doing his best, a man trapped in the chaos of too many responsibilities. But to those who truly loved him, Drevonte Halloway was wrought behind the smile. He was pain with a perfect fade. Poison in a gold chain. And the damage he caused was starting to show in the eyes of the women who once called him mine. Drevonte Halloway built his kingdom on secrets, and for a while, it worked. He was a master manipulator, one smooth conversation away from forgiveness, one text away from another fresh start. But every empire of lies eventually cracks, and Dre's. It didn't just crack. It bled. He played them all. Told Roneisha she was his queen, the only one to give him real children, his twin legacy, he called them. He whispered to Tychelle that he was sterile, that any woman claiming to be pregnant by him was either delusional or lying. He looked Saphyra dead in the eye and swore the other baby mamas were obsessed with him, stalking him, trying to sabotage what they had. But Dre was getting sloppy. Maybe it was arrogance. Maybe it was just math finally catching up to him. With 27 kids and 16 mothers, things started to overlap. Kids with the same birthday. Receipts from the same motel, the same night. Ultrasounds with dates that didn't match the stories. And when the women started talking, really talking, it was over. It started with Roneisha's cousin, who bumped into Tychelle at a pediatric clinic. A side comment turned into a curious look. A quick scroll through social media turned into screenshots. Suddenly there was a group chat with names that shouldn't have belonged in the same conversation. But they did. And each message hit like a slap to the face. Wait, he told you he was living with his mom? Girl, he was at my place that whole week. My baby was born in August. He said yours came in October. No. Mine came in July. It snowballed. And for Roneisha Tillman, it crushed her. She had given this man 9 years. Held him down when he got locked up. Took him back when she found that lipstick on his hoodie. She believed in his dreams, if you could call them that. She believed in their family. And now, it was clear. She was just one stop in a rotation. One more womb he used. One more name in his phone he probably didn't even save correctly. The night it hit her, she was found curled on her cold kitchen floor, knees to her chest, shaking like the whole world was collapsing inward. Her voice was a whisper, ragged and broken. He used me, we all just wombs to him. But Roneisha wasn't the type to stay down. Grief gave way to anger. And anger? That gave way to purpose. She started digging. Every lie, every name, every date. She traced his steps like a detective with nothing left to lose. And when she couldn't carry it alone anymore, she dropped it all in that same group chat. Turned the pain into fire. And that fire? It spread. Because the group chat wasn't just a place to swap horror stories anymore. It was becoming something else. Something darker. December 3rd, 2024, started like any other night for Drevonte Halloway, slick with ego, humming with anticipation. He'd gotten a message from a new number. A girl said she'd heard about him through a friend. She wanted to meet. Wanted to see if the legend lived up to the name. Said she'd be waiting at an old duplex off South Wellington. Discreet. No strings. Just him, her, and the kind of night he thought he deserved. Dre didn't hesitate. Why would he? That was his world, women falling into his lap like clockwork, no questions asked. He threw on a designer hoodie, dabbed on cologne, and strutted into the Memphis night like a man headed to claim a prize. But this wasn't a prize. It was a reckoning. The duplex sat quiet and empty, its windows like dead eyes, boarded and blackened with rot. The door was slightly ajar, creaking when he pushed it open. No lights. No voices. Just the thick smell of mildew and something off. Still, Dre smirked. He stepped inside. The second the door slammed behind him, it was over. For shadows lunged from the darkness. He barely had time to scream before he was tackled to the floor. Zip ties yanked tight around his wrists and ankles. A hood pulled over his head. Panic hit him too late, because by the time they dragged him into the room and tied him to the rusted kitchen chair, his fate was sealed. Roneisha was the first one he saw when they yanked the hood off. Her face, cold, unreadable. Next to her stood Tychelle, arms crossed, jaw clenched like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. Saphyra was shaking, but her eyes burned with rage. And then Ahliyah, the youngest, barely 21, held the hammer with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. He tried to talk. To charm. To beg. But they weren't here for words. Roneisha pulled out a list, handwritten in red ink, and began reading. Each name was a child. His child. All 27. Armani. Khalil. Destiny. Ziwakwan. She read them slowly, like a funeral toll. Then came the voicemails. Tychelle hit play on her phone. One by one, recordings of little voices crackled through the silence. "Daddy, where are you? Mommy cried again today. Why don't you love me?" Drevonte's bravado cracked. Then came the boiling water. Saphyra poured it slow over his thighs while he screamed, thrashing against the chair until the plastic zip ties carved into his skin. Blisters bubbled. Flesh sizzled. He begged them to stop. Ahliyah shoved a crumpled piece of paper into his mouth, an old child support letter. Then another. They forced him to chew, to swallow. Choked him with his own forgotten responsibilities. And then came the tools. The hammer hit first, ribs, kneecaps, fingers. Then the knife, careful, deliberate, slicing at his chest, his face, the skin behind his ears. Every cut was a sentence. A name. A lie. "You told me I was your wife," Tychelle hissed. "You said my twins were all you had," Roneisha spat. "You made me think I was your only one," Ahliyah wept. But it was Saphyra who gave the final whisper. "You made a fool of us. So now we'll show the world what a real monster looks like." They stripped him bare. Mutilated his genitals, sliced them clean and stuffed them into his mouth. Duct taped it shut. Blood filled his throat before the screaming could. They carved the names of his children into his chest one after another, all 16 of them. Then came the lighter fluid. Poured over his body like holy water. They stepped back. One match. One flicker. And then flames. The fire lit up the night sky, pouring smoke from the broken windows of that dead duplex. His screams, muffled and grotesque, echoed into the dark for only a few seconds before the fire took over completely. By the time neighbors called the fire department, all that remained of Drevonte Halloway was a scorched chair, a burned-out floor, and a legend turned to ash. The morning after Drevonte Halloway's charred remains were discovered, Memphis exploded with questions, shockwaves rippling through the community like an earthquake. The fire, consuming a man so widely known for his deceptions, left a city in disbelief. It was a spectacle no one could have predicted. The media pounced immediately, scrambling for answers. Who could have done this? Who would go to such extreme lengths to destroy the notorious womanizer, the man who'd been both revered and despised in equal measure? In the frantic search for answers, it took just 72 hours for police to uncover something that would turn the case from a gruesome murder into something far more complicated. Detective Reyes, scanning through the cluttered phone records, stumbled upon a group chat titled Holloway's Hellbound. The name alone was enough to send chills down anyone's spine, but what lay within was even darker. The group chat was a horrifying catalog of meticulous planning, a record of the lives Dre had ruined, and the women he had used as pawns in his personal game of manipulation. They had all come together, Roneisha, Tychelle, Saphyra, Ahliyah, and the others, and had one thing in mind: justice, or perhaps something darker, something beyond what any of them had been capable of in their own broken worlds. Then came the voice memos. The cold, chilling audio that would haunt the case forever. In them, the women laughed and spoke without hesitation about their plans. They were unburdened, no remorse in their words, just the sharp, clear objective to make Dre pay. They spoke of his lies, each one a dagger, each broken promise a justification for what they were about to do. The recordings were like a documentary of a twisted revenge plot, but there was something deeply unsettling in how they spoke. Their voices were calm. Too calm. As though murder was nothing more than an inevitability. They were simply tying up loose ends. "We'll get him back for every lie," one woman's voice said, dripping with venom. Another added, "He's not gonna see this coming. It's time he knows what it feels like to be powerless." There was no doubt now. This wasn't just a murder, it was a calculated act of vengeance. The media frenzy swirled around the women like a storm. Everyone had an opinion, and the lines between right and wrong blurred faster than anyone could follow. Some called them cold-blooded murderers, calling for swift justice, demanding that they face the full weight of the law. Others, though, saw them differently. They called them warriors. The public seemed divided, as though Dre's reputation had somehow softened the harshness of his death. After all, in his twisted web of lies, he had made so many believe in his charm and charisma, even as he tore apart the lives of women and children alike. But as the media circus took hold, something was lost in the fray, something that no one seemed to want to talk about. The children. All 27 of them. The sons and daughters whose lives would be forever marked by their father's actions. They were the ones left to sift through the ashes, to face the truth of who Drevonte Halloway really was. Each child, scattered across the city in homes of exes and strangers, had to come to terms with the fact that the man they thought was their protector, their provider, was a liar, a storm of chaos and selfishness, leaving nothing behind but broken promises and pain. For some, the loss of a father was a complicated grief, tangled with relief. But for others, the weight of the truth was too much to bear. Their father, the man they once thought of as a hero, had not been a hero at all. He had been a predator. As the cameras flashed and the city raged with opinions, the children of Drevonte Halloway began to grapple with something far more complicated than the world could ever understand. They weren't just mourning a father. They were mourning a myth. And they had to live with the legacy of his betrayal for the rest of their lives. But for the 4 women, the mothers who had once been so broken and betrayed by him, the pain was not just personal. Their children, too, would have to find a way to move forward. Roneisha's twins, Tychelle's boy, Saphyra's daughters, and Ahliyah's young son, all bonded in shared grief, finding solidarity in their shared experience of loss. They were all now motherless and fatherless, left to piece together a sense of identity that had been torn apart by Dre's web of lies. Together, they navigated the silence of their absent parents, a family now fractured by the sins of the man who had promised them nothing but heartbreak. Their reflection was a quiet one, an understanding that, despite the brutality of their parents' actions, they were left to carry the burden of their legacies. Without their mothers and fathers, they were forced to grow up faster than they ever should have, learning that the scars of betrayal run deeper than blood, and that sometimes, survival means finding a way to move on, even when the past refuses to let go. As the women were led away in handcuffs, the streets of Memphis buzzed with a strange mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. The arrests had come quickly, but the fallout would last a lifetime. The 4 women, Roneisha, Tychelle, Saphyra, and Ahliyah, faced the justice system without resistance, but the truth of their motives was far more complicated than anyone could fully understand. Their mugshots told a story in themselves. Roneisha's face was hard, her jaw clenched in barely contained rage. Tychelle's eyes held a look of numbness, as if she'd already resigned herself to the consequences. Saphyra's lips trembled, the weight of the ordeal too heavy to hide, and Ahliyah, the youngest of them all, wore a mixture of fear and quiet defiance, her life forever altered by the violence she had witnessed and participated in. The trial that followed was a public spectacle. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension, and the testimonies were gut-wrenching. The defense lawyers argued that the women had acted in self-defense, their lives broken by the man who had promised them the world but had delivered nothing but pain. The prosecution painted them as cold-blooded murderers, ruthless in their pursuit of vengeance, willing to sacrifice Dre's life for their own sense of justice. But in the end, it was Roneisha's words that resonated the loudest, the words that would be etched in the public's mind for years to come. She stood in the witness stand, her voice steady despite the emotions that swirled beneath the surface, and she spoke to the world. He destroyed every one of us. He broke our bodies, our minds, our spirits. We didn't kill him because we hated him. We killed him because he killed us first. Her words hung in the air like a weight, undeniable in their truth. Dre had taken something from each of them, something precious, and had left them to pick up the pieces of shattered lives. The women's faces showed no joy in their actions, only the quiet pain of those who had suffered so much that they felt there was no other way out. Outside the courthouse, the public was divided. Protesters gathered, demanding justice, but their messages were conflicting. Some held signs that read justice for the mothers, calling for the women to be seen not as murderers, but as survivors of a system that had failed them, women who had been used and discarded. Others, more conservative in their views, shouted for maximum sentencing, condemning the brutality of the murder and the pain Dre had caused. It was a battleground of opinions, each side trying to claim the moral high ground, but underneath it all, there was an undeniable truth: no one was innocent in this tragic story. The judge, after hearing all the evidence, gave his verdict with a heavy heart. Roneisha, Tychelle, and Saphyra were each sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Their actions were unforgivable in the eyes of the law, but in the eyes of many, they were the victims of a world that had chewed them up and spit them out. Ahliyah, still so young, was given a 35-year sentence, a sentence that reflected her age and her cooperation during the trial. But even her fate was uncertain. The weight of what she had done, of what she had witnessed, would haunt her for the rest of her life. The media, in its relentless pursuit of a story, had already dubbed them the baby mama executioners. It was a title that would stick, a label that defined them forever. But the truth was more complicated than any headline could convey. These women were not murderers born of malice, but survivors shaped by years of manipulation, abuse, and broken promises. The world had failed them, and in their eyes, Dre had failed them the most. And in a moment of rage, of utter desperation, they had acted, not out of hatred, but out of a need for justice that the world had denied them. As the media turned its gaze away from the trial and onto the next scandal, the story of Drevonte Halloway's death became part of the city's darker history. But for the families, for the children, and for the women who had been caught in Dre's web of lies, the aftermath was far from over. They were left to pick up the pieces, to find a way to heal from the wounds that Dre had inflicted. The legacy of Drevonte Halloway was one of destruction, of lives shattered, families torn apart, and hearts broken. But for Roneisha, Tychelle, Saphyra, and Ahliyah, their story didn't end with the trial. The prison gates would never truly close the doors on the pain they carried, the scars they would never be able to erase. They were women who had been abandoned, betrayed, and deceived. And they would carry that weight for the rest of their lives. In the end, justice was served, but it was a hollow victory. The story of Dre and the women he had left behind would be remembered as a tragic reminder of the destructive power of lies and betrayal. And for those who had lived through it, the question remained: could anyone ever truly heal from the wounds left by a man who had played with their lives as if they were nothing more than toys to be discarded when he was finished? The answer, like so much of this story, remained painfully unclear. This is not just a story of one man's lies or four women's revenge. It's a story of trauma, neglect, manipulation, and the catastrophic price of unchecked ego. Drevonte Halloway lived like a king, but even kings bleed. The foundation of his empire was built on the backs of the women he betrayed, and in the end, it was those very same women who tore his world apart. But what does it say about a society when the victims are forced to take justice into their own hands? What happens when survival becomes a matter of seeking retribution instead of healing? The tragic end of Dre and his reign of deceit serves as a mirror to the complex, often messy realities of human behavior, where love, fear, resentment, and rage collide, and the lines between right and wrong blur into something darker. Were these women pushed too far, or did they become the very thing they were fighting? Could this tragedy have been avoided if truth and accountability came sooner? What role did society play in enabling Drevonte's behavior? Could the cycle of neglect and manipulation have been broken if someone had stepped in sooner? As the dust settles and the children of Drevonte Halloway face a future without their parents, one thing is clear: the scars left behind will never heal completely. It's a haunting reminder that sometimes, the price of one man's ego is paid by many others, who then must navigate the wreckage of their own lives. If this story left you speechless, like and subscribe for more deep dives into the chilling, complex world of human behavior, where love, betrayal, and violence collide in unthinkable ways.